All right. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to another Trimmed and Burning Bible study. We are in 2 Samuel, continuing along. Today we're going to be in chapter 16. So if you have your Bibles, you can open up to chapter 16 a while. I'll do a very quick recap of what's been going on, just to always get our minds into what's been taking place with what we're reading about. Now, the stuff we're reading about today is a continuation of this whole situation. Really, David and Bathsheba we learned about started this whole mess in David's life. But this whole thing with Amnon and Tamar, remember Amnon violated Tamar in this evil situation. So Absalom, his brother, David's other son, killed him. And remember, Amnon was the crown prince, should have been the next king. And David was angry about him violating Tamar, but never did anything because it's the crown prince and he showed a little bit of favoritism. And David does that. Even the great king of Israel did a lot of sinful things by showing favoritism to his family. Absalom knew it, took it into his own hands, also sinful. Can't murder people like this, right? If you're Absalom, he had no authority to do that, but he did that, and then he had to flee to Geshur, where his grandfather was also king. So his dad was king, but his grandfather was king. He had a lot of royal blood in him. So he just went and hid in Geshur because he knew that they could have avenged him for what he did. Then we learned that Joab, probably worried about some political instability because of his position, didn't want there to break civil war. So he had to convince David because David kept Absalom exiled. And Joab had to figure out this way, how are we going to convince David? And I'm sure he thought, it doesn't say this, I'm sure he thought, well, it worked for Nathan when Nathan told him this parable and this story about the sheep. I'm going to get a wise woman from Tekoa because he'll know I'm doing it. He won't believe I'm telling him this story. So he gets a wise woman from Tekoa, comes and pitches this whole thing, this whole story about her son and one killing the other one and how she just won't have any other sons left. And it was all to convince David in his own situation to bring Absalom back. So he did bring Absalom back, but remember, it was only a partial restoration. And I talked about how partial restoration is no restoration at all. Meaning Absalom was allowed back in the kingdom, but at an arm's length. He was not allowed to come into the presence of the king. So he had to stay where he was at. And this went on for, I think, 2 years that he wasn't able to see him. And Absalom finally gets sick of it and says, he's trying to send for Joab. Joab won't come. Sends for him again, he won't come. Joab's the one that went and got him in the first place. But now Joab, his deed's done, so he kind of let it go. Absalom got so mad he set his field on fire, which will be detrimental later. Their relationship's basically ruined over this. It did get his attention, but again, things that get people's attention, it's not always the best to take these kinds of actions. But he did get Joab to come back, and he says, why am I here? Why don't you send me back to Geshur? Because I'm living the same life I am here back then. I can't see my father or anything like that. So it got settled where Absalom and David kind of made up then after that. He kissed his hand, he bowed to him, they did the whole thing, but really inside they were still bitter about everything. Then last week, in chapter 15, we found out how Absalom, now that he's allowed to be around the king, he would wake up early in the morning and get down to the city gate, because that was like their courthouse, where all the judging was going on. People were bringing their cases to be the disputes to get taken care of, and Absalom would get there before everybody else and say, hey, where are you from? I love you, I care about you guys, how could I help you? It's a shame that David doesn't have anybody here to help you. So he kind of convinces people, and it says he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. He convinced them that he cared, gave them simple answers, just like what I always say politicians can do. Like, oh, if I were in charge, it would be so much better. And they give you no plan. That's what Absalom's one of the earliest politicians, you could say, to pull that off and to get people to vote for Absalom over David, essentially, to be king, even though there is no voting in the kingdom. So we know that Absalom eventually took over. He went to Hebron. He convinced 200 innocent men to go with him. They didn't know what they were doing, but it made it look like he had a whole crew and was getting ready to take over. So Absalom was able to take over in Hebron, and David had to flee Jerusalem. He was being wise and said, hey, if we don't get out of here soon, it's going to be bad. Absalom's going to come. I don't want to have a war, and he'll wipe us out because Israel's kind of turned on me right now. So it's not good, and they left and fled Jerusalem. And then it ended, if you remember, where David arranged a secret communication network because he's still very wise. And he said, while I'm gone, I'm going to need some spies. So he sends the priest back with the Ark of the Covenant. Says, I don't need the Ark of the Covenant. That's God's presence. God's with me. If he wants me to go back and see the Ark of the Covenant, he will. He'll take me back there. You guys go back there. You guys are wise, and I'm going to have your sons, Ahimaaz, Jonathan, they're going to deliver me messages, right? And he sets up this communication network. And at the end, Hushai wanted to come with David, and he's like, you'd be a burden. And we think it's because he's an old man. Like, you'd be a burden, but there is a way you can help. You could kind of be my false, you could go be a spy and kind of, Ahithophel, who had switched, was one of David's counselors, went with Absalom. He said, well, you can maybe convince Absalom to not follow Ahithophel's wise counsel because he's very wise, and maybe you could do that. So Hushai agreed, and I actually love The last verse of chapter 15, and since you're in 16, you'll see it right there. I wanted to mention this last week. Verse 37, how it ends. I love how it ends. So Hushai, David's friend, came into the city just as Absalom was entering Jerusalem. Remember, Absalom was in Hebron. And he was going back to Jerusalem to take it over. And Hushai just happens to get there just in time. These are what we call in the modern day, a lot of Europe people call synchronicities. God's been full of them forever. What are the odds that Hushai got in there just in amount of time? They didn't have clocks, they didn't have cell phones, they didn't have data on who was where and what time they were arriving, right? They didn't have ETAs or anything like that. So you could see he moved Hushai to get there just in time to make it look like Hushai never left. Because if he would have found Hushai going in, where were you, Hushai? Who were you talking to? Why did you leave, right? So God was perfectly timing it. So Hushai got back after this conversation just in time for there to be no, worries about it. Because the whole time, Absalom, remember, he was in Hebron going up to Jerusalem. So the priests and everybody were able to get back in time for him not to know about any of that plan. And that's where we left off last week. Now we're going to jump into 2 Samuel 16, verse by verse. We're going to go ahead and jump in here and read this one. Verse 1. When David had passed a little beyond the summit, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of donkeys saddled, bearing 200 loaves of bread, 100 bunches of raisins, 100 of summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And the king said to Ziba, "Why have you brought these?" Ziba answered, "The donkeys are for the king's household to ride on, the bread and summer fruit for the young men to eat, and the wine for those who faint in the wilderness to drink." And the king said, "And where is your master's son?" Ziba said to the king, "Behold, he remains in Jerusalem, for he said, 'Today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father.'" Then the king said to Ziba, "Behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours." And Ziba said, "I pay homage. Let me ever find favor in your sight, my lord the king." When King David came to Bahurim, there came out a man of the family of the house of Saul, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually. And he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David, and all the people and all the mighty men were on his right hand and on his left. And Shimei said as he cursed, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. The Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. And the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. See, your evil is on you, for you are a man of blood." Then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head." But the king said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, 'Curse David,' who then shall say, 'Why have you done so?'" And David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. It may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today." So David and his men went on the road, while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him, and cursed as he went, and threw stones at him and flung dust. And the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. Now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. And when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, Hushai said to Absalom, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" And Absalom said to Hushai, "Is this your loyalty to your friend? Why did you not go with your friend?" And Hushai said to Absalom, "No, for whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. And again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you." Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give your counsel. What shall we do?" Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house, and all Israel will hear that you have made yourself a stench to your father, and the hands of all who are with you will be strengthened." So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and Absalom went into his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel esteemed, both by David and by Absalom. And that's the end of the chapter there. So there's a lot that's taking place here. It can be confusing at first, but we're going to break some of this down. So first, I'll just break down the first 4 verses with David and Ziba here, and the fruit and the bread and the donkeys and all those things here. So first off, does anybody remember who Ziba was? Anybody remember Ziba? He showed up early in this chapter. Do you remember, Graham?
I do.
Yep.
But I always say the name wrong.
Oh, you might say it right. I just say it like that. There's all different pronunciations. Tomato, tomato. Ziba, Ziba.
Yeah. Ziba was supposed to help on
Mephibosheth. That's a tongue twister. Mephibosheth.
On his property.
Yes.
He and his sons were supposed to be servants.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. So she's correct. It's chapter 9 that happened. So yeah, he was supposed to be the servant and the manager of the property. Why would he be the manager of the property? Remember, Mephibosheth's crippled, right? So how's he going to take care of this stuff? Plus, he's, the king's, he's part of his royal family. So yes, we read about Ziba in chapter 9. He was given, it was kind of a good deal for him because they get these great jobs and they get to share in all the stuff. So he had so many servants. I want to say it's 30 servants, 20 sons, big crew, big work crew, right? And they were the managers. A pretty honorable job given by King David. So we've seen Ziba before, right? And that's where we know he was supposed to be stewarding Mephibosheth's land. So it says here that Ziba shows up, so David knows him, and he shows up, and it says he came with a couple of donkeys, loaves of bread, raisins, summer fruits, and a skin of wine. And he brings these 2 donkeys are for the royal family. Remember, donkeys are usually a royal thing to ride on, so he's bringing them for the family. And then he brought all this food and stuff for David's people. Why would they need it? Well, they're out in the wilderness, right? They're not in Jerusalem. So this is like a nice, generous thing. On the surface, it looks like a really good, loyal act of kindness. Like, wow, Ziba's still honoring David as king. He's leaving. He's taking all this stuff, got all his servants, loaded it up with all this fruit and bread and wine. But deep down, we're going to learn that not every gift is an act of generosity. Some are manipulative, and we believe this one is manipulative. Why? Well, let's look down in verse 3. And the king said, "And where is your master's son?" So this is an important question because Mephibosheth's crippled. He can't just walk around on his own like, hey, where's Mephibosheth? You're supposed to be in charge of his land. Where's he at? Why didn't he come? And Ziba here accuses Mephibosheth of betraying David. He says, Mephibosheth's back there saying, today the house of Israel will give me back the kingdom of my father. He's basically saying, well, now that Absalom's kind of run you out, Mephibosheth thinks he's going to take the kingdom back. That's why he didn't come. And to me, it just doesn't add up. Now, maybe out of his mind he'd think that, but why would Absalom, who's angry and his dad was in charge, he ran him out, why would Absalom want to kill his father, chase his father out just to say, oh, Mephibosheth, you are of Saul's family. I know you're crippled, but how about I just hand the kingdom over to you, right? I don't even think Mephibosheth would have thought that. Who knows? But I don't think so. And we believe this was Ziba taking advantage of a crisis, right? And you could say Ziba's being greedy. Why is he greedy? Because he just couldn't be the manager. He wanted to be the master of that land. He wanted it all. He wanted everything Mephibosheth had. And he wanted to be in David's eyes. He wanted to be favorable in David's eyes. It's kind of similar to when Judas would pretend to care for the poor, and the whole time we knew he was stealing money, like, oh, why did you spend all that money on that perfume? You could have given it to the poor. Meanwhile, Judas was dipping out, right? Other things. So sometimes people are generous for their own gain, and I think that's what's happening here with Ziba. And I don't just say that. You'll find out when we get to chapter 19, David will talk to Mephibosheth, and it will kind of open your eyes as maybe what was going on here. But it says, then the king said to Ziba, behold, all that belonged to Mephibosheth is now yours. So David makes a hasty judgment, says, what? He's saying he's taking my kingdom, that's it. Everything he had, you're not only the manager, you own it. It's all yours, take it from Mephibosheth, you own it. Now when you go back, just take it all. Now, I think Ziba was an opportunist, as you'd call it, right? Why didn't Ziba do this, earlier? Well, it was a good excuse to say that Mephibosheth stayed back, but he could have left the land before and went up to David and said, hey, Mephibosheth's talking about taking the kingdom. He didn't do it. It was an opportunity. Why? David is stressed out to the max. His son's trying to kill him, and he's running, and here's Ziba bringing up, this Mephibosheth and what's going on. And it's kind of like, you ever be like, I can think it was Roscoe sometimes, I'm super stressed out, and I'm trying to do things, and I'm so busy, and Roscoe's like, can I get cookies? Like, yeah, just go grab cookies. And it's not dinner time yet, but I'm just like so focused, I'm just like, whatever. Just take whatever you need, just go ahead. I think it's one of these situations where David's so overwhelmed. He's like, what? And he's so already probably angry, right? Angry at Absalom for what he's done, that he's now just in that angry mode. And you got to be careful of this. When you get angry and stressed out, everything starts to become angry. And then somebody brings something up, and I'm angry about that, and I'm angry about that. So I'm sure David was furious with maybe even Mephibosheth here. And unfortunately, David did not heed his son wrote later in Proverbs 18:13, if one gives an answer before he hears, it is his folly and shame. And that's what David here, he made a rash decision out of just probably stress. and he should have stopped and said, well, when I get back, I'll talk to Mephibosheth. That's not good, But he kind of just jumps to conclusions. So beware of flattery and manipulation. I think that's what's going on here. And also remember to be slow to judge without hearing both sides first, is what we notice here. All right, let's go down. So that's kind of what happened there with the Ziba situation. And it'll come back around in chapter 19, and we'll see more of it later. But now we're going to get to this interesting part of Shimei. This guy named Shimei cursing David. It says, when King David came to Bahurim, there came a man of the family of the house of Israel, whose name was Shimei, the son of Gera. And as he came, he cursed continually. So he's from the house of Saul. He's from Saul's family, maybe not direct in a lineage of it, but he's still a part of it, and he's still upset with what has happened. He's holding a grudge against David from Saul's downfall, and he's falsely blaming David for it. So look what he does here. It says, he threw stones at David and at all the servants of King David and all the people and the mighty men who were on his right hand and on his left. So this is hostile and a public act of disrespect. I mean, could you just imagine going out and as like the president or the mayor or the governor's there and we're throwing stones from hills at him and all of his workers and all of his people? It wouldn't end well, right? We would be arrested, thrown in cuffs, maybe hit a little bit with some nightsticks or something, I don't know. So it was a bad situation, a rebellious way to go about things, and it symbolized rebellion back then. That was a symbolized rebellion, that he was rejecting David and he was mad at him and his people, which is, again, Exodus 22:28. David was still king, so he broke this in Exodus 22, you shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. So Shimei is sinning right here, as we could have probably guessed. He's supposed to honor his rulers, and he's not doing that. In verse 7 and 8, it picks up more. It says, get out, you man of blood, you worthless man. So he basically calls David a murderer. It's a serious accusation. He's actually right, remember? This whole situation probably is happening because he's a man murdered because he killed Uriah, right? So he's actually probably right, but he misconstrues it here because he starts, as we see, blame it on David. But you have to understand, like that's the irony in all this. If he would have said it about Uriah and Bathsheba, it probably would have stuck a little bit more. But because he's saying it was all about Saul and what he did to Saul, it's so interesting because David was the most generous maybe to Saul. He could have killed Saul twice, if you remember. He ran from Saul. He never tried to take the kingdom from him. He waited decades until God actually brought him the kingdom, right? And even when his son rebelled, Ishbosheth, he didn't even kill him. He didn't even try to kill him yet, right? It was this whole war, but he was mad when they chopped his head off unrightfully. And remember, David cried about Saul dying. So it's kind of backwards what he has here. But he says, the Lord has avenged on you all the blood of the house of Saul. So he's wrongly assuming that God is punishing David because of taking the throne from Saul. In his mind, he might think this is true. Like, David wasn't of that bloodline. You can't just steal the kingdom, David. So he, in his mind, Shimei thinks David really is getting chased out by Absalom because of what he did to Saul. And this is a warning to us. Sometimes people will wrongly accuse you that you're suffering or going through something because of some sin they think you did, right? Whether you did or didn't do that. And that's why I always come back to around, I never blame when somebody, gets sick or has something bad happen, and you hear people like, well, they've been into a lot of sin. You never know what God's going to do. I don't try to judge that because it might be for sin. Like in this situation, David probably is getting chased out for his sin, but the wrong one. So don't pick and choose which sin. He didn't sin about Saul. And I'm sure Shimei went back and was like, hey, David's getting what he got from doing to my relative Saul. It's completely off base, right? But that's what's happening. And he says, the Lord has given the kingdom into the hand of your son Absalom. So Shimei also, he thinks, and I'm sure some other people did too, that Absalom was going to have a permanent reign, that David was chased out forever, and God had literally stripped the kingdom from him and given it to Absalom. But later we're going to see David's going to come back and take the throne. But at the time, they don't know that. Even David didn't know that. Remember, he said, well, if God lets me return, that's great. If not, it's my fault, right? God knows what's best. But he falsely accuses David, and he falsely assumes that David is out of the kingdom forever. Later, you'll find out in chapter 19, it is, that Shimei is going to beg for mercy later. So things will come back around. His sins will catch up to him. But there's a lot of false accusations and misjudgments happening there. So be careful not to falsely accuse people or misjudge while things are happening. Let God figure it out. And God will defend who he needs to defend and take care of that there. All right, so we're going to move on down then to verse 9 and 10. says, verse 9, why should this dead, this is Abishai. Remember Abishai is a brother of Joab. They're the sons of Zeruiah. Their brother Asahel got killed in that war, and they just love to go and cut people's heads off, stab them, and take care of them. If they're a problem, they get rid of them, right? They're very aggressive people. And he says, why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and take off his head, right? So a dead dog, we heard Mephibosheth use that language before. Dogs, not like America, we love our dogs. Actually, I was studying, I was looking at my dog, and like, oh, can't believe they hated dogs in ancient Israel. They did, though. So that was like a derogatory thing. I mean, I still wouldn't call people dogs, right? Because, yeah, sometimes it can get really bad. But then a dead dog was also a helpless, like worthless animal. So it's extra worthless. So he's saying, this Shimei, why are we going to let this guy throw stones at us? He's not even a ruler. He's nobody high. Let me just go chop his head off. Take care of this guy. I'm sick of hearing him, right? Because he's getting rocks thrown at him too. And he's sick of it. And it shows again, Abishai and Joab, the first thought, they're those kind of people, the first people that have a problem, let's fight. Let's go fight them. Let's go knock their blocks off. Let's go punch them. It's like, oh, settle down. We can have conversations, right? We can relax. But they are those kind of people. Proverbs warns us about this. Proverbs 29, verse 11. A fool gives full vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back. So we'll see the difference here. David at least understood that one, again, before it was written. Abishai wants immediate justice right now, and David's going to choose to restrain himself and use wisdom to let God sort it out. So wisdom to us, don't always go for immediate justice. It's really hard not to, especially when you know people are doing the wrong thing and the evil things. You want to get them back. You want to take care of it right away. Sometimes you got to let God play it out himself. Verse 10, what have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? Basically saying, this isn't your concern, Abishai. Why does it involve you? I'm the king. Don't worry about it, right? And he's also basically, you sons of Zeruiah. That is a derogatory way he's using it right now. Basically, you violent men. You guys are violent. What do I have to do? You guys are always so violent. You guys are always wanting to kill people. I'm sick of you guys. I'm sure David was like fed up with Abishai. He's just fed up with everybody at this point, I'm sure, too. He's just like all in his head, too. So he's like, Abishai, just drop it. Let it go. If he is cursing because the Lord has said to him, curse David, who then shall say, why have you done so? So David shows humility here. He says, hey, maybe God wants me to suffer. Because you know what? Shimei is wrong about the Saul thing, but I did some pretty bad stuff, which is why I'm in the situation I am here today. So if God put it in his mouth to come and curse me, well, we better let him do it. So instead of silencing Shimei, David submitted to God's sovereignty, right? Accepting that God may be allowing this, which he's probably right to an extent, right? And this is like what Job said, Job 2. Shall we receive good from God and shall we not receive evil, right? So this happens sometimes, especially when there was sin. And David knows he's not innocent either in all this. So he's wise enough to know that. Verse 11, we'll move on here. And it says, David said to Abishai and to all his servants, behold, my own son seeks my life. How much more now may this Benjaminite? Leave him alone and let him curse, for the Lord has told him to. So behold, my own son seeks my life. Basically, David's saying, listen, my own son is trying to kill me. This doesn't surprise me. Some random Benjaminite from Saul's family. This is the least of my worries, guys. I'm more worried about my son who's trying to run me out of my kingdom and kill me. Why wouldn't this guy also be mad at me, right? And it puts Shimei's actions into perspective, probably for the people. They were probably all worked up. All those other men that weren't Abishai were probably like, some were probably like, let's get him. And then David's like, listen, everybody's mad at me. We can't just, every time somebody gets mad and wants to kill me, we just cut their heads off, right? So David's bringing reason, right? It doesn't mean that God necessarily approved of Shimei's cursing, but rather David saw this as a test of humility and endurance. So whenever somebody's doing something against you that doesn't seem right, just say, well, I'll just endure it. I don't have to get in a fight with them. I'll just allow the Lord to handle it. I'll pray about it, right? And that's what he does here. And Proverbs 19:11, good sense makes one slow to anger, and it is glory to overlook an offense. So David is practicing wisdom right here, right? Verse 12, it may be that the Lord will look on the wrong done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing today. So again, instead of taking revenge, David places his trust in God's justice and says, hey, maybe if I just let this happen, God, because I will restrain this and don't fight back, God will bless me. So sometimes it might be a test. Maybe we'll just let God and we'll see. And if I react one way, it'll go one way. And if I allow this to happen, God will be with me. So he says, I'm just going to let God take care of it. And again, Romans says that, beloved, never avenge yourselves, but leave it to the wrath of God. For it is written, vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. And Romans was written, over 1,000 years later, but wisdom of God's always been around, right? So it's written down in Romans. And David, again, is surrendering vengeance to God here, which is wise of him. So it says in verse 13, so David and his men went on the road while Shimei went along on the hillside opposite him and cursed as he went and threw stones at him and flung dust. So Shimei does not stop cursing. He keeps on going. So the whole way to Jordan, after he's like, just let him go. The whole time they're just like ducking. There's another rock hitting off their helmets. There's the whole time dust is in their eyes. They're wiping their eyes. It would have been an awful, awful journey to Jordan, right? Would have been awful. And also, I can't help but notice this along the hillside, right? Shimei wasn't stupid. He wasn't down on the road throwing rocks. He's kind of like the kids that you throw from afar and then you can run. He was ready to run, I think. At any moment he saw Abishai run with the sword, he was taking off. So he's not stupid. He's up on the hill throwing him down from a safe distance. So he thought it was safe. And I'm sure Abishai, we've seen what's happened before. Abishai could have probably chased him down and killed him. But I couldn't help but notice he's doing it from a safe distance here. And it says he cursed as he went and threw stones and flung dust. So he's escalating the hostilities. Shimei's almost picking a fight. Instead of stopping, he's flinging dust, he's shouting, he's screaming, he's cursing them, and it's just getting out of control. And these are, in the Middle East, this is deep acts of dishonor, right? Deep dishonor here. And David as a king would normally have people executed for this disrespect. If this happened in the kingdom, trust me, if before Absalom, somebody came and done this, David probably would have had their heads chopped off, right? Because they're actually breaking rules. You can't do this to your ruler. You can't talk like this to your king that God chose, God's anointed, right? So he really is asking for it. Like you can say, this guy's asking for it. But David is showing wise restraint here. And it says, and the king and all the people who were with him arrived weary at the Jordan. Can you imagine that? They're weary. I can imagine they would have been weary without this, right? It's a long journey. Luckily, Ziba brought some snacks, right? He brought some snacks for them. So they had some food, but it's a long journey, right? And not only that, like it kind of reminds me I love driving to Myrtle Beach, like a 10-hour drive. It's a long drive. So you can get weird when you get there. But could you imagine the whole time the kids, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Where's the snacks? When are we stopping? It makes the trip worse. You know what I'm talking about? You guys all know. Some respect. You might have been the kid. You might be the adult. I don't know. But things happen, right? Things happen when it doesn't make things better when you're already exhausted and these extra things. So, these people were weary, right? They have dust all over their faces. They got hit in the head with rocks. They might even be bleeding. Some might have concussions. They got hit with some good ones, right? And they've been walking and walking and walking, right? So, but I love what it says there. They were weary at the Jordan, and there he refreshed himself. So at the Jordan, it shows a little bit of rest. And the Jordan, often in biblical times, is a symbol of transition and rest from God's work here, right? We always say, we're going to cross the Jordan one day, right? Because that's what they did. They crossed the Jordan back in Joshua's time. When we say cross the Jordan, we mean go to heaven, right? Crossing to the other side, right? Jordan is a transitional time here. So now they're going to rest to get restored at the Jordan River. And that's why that's there to show there's a transitional spiritual renewal coming here. And I'm sure you could hear David in Psalm 23. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. He's getting restored here. David's faith in God allows him to endure these hardships, knowing that refreshment will come, right? And that's what this shows us. You can feel weary what you're doing right now. If you're doing the right thing for God right now and you're weary and exhausted and it's just getting worse and worse, know that there is a point where you'll get to the Jordan River. And I'm not saying dying. I'm saying you'll get to the Jordan River in this situation where God will eventually make it. I can test this. It'll go away. You'll get peace. You'll be restored and you'll feel refreshed again. And you'll almost forget until you remember how rough it was on the road to where you got, right? So there are those moments of refreshment. So he endures this in the face of harassment here. They're weary, but he trusts in God, and God provides a moment of restoration right here, which shows God's renewal in difficult seasons in our own lives. If we trust in God, he'll bring us through our trials to a place of refreshing, right? And to the last section here, we have Absalom entering Jerusalem. So now it's kind of like in those movies where it cuts back to the scene. Remember when Hushai walked into Jerusalem just in time? We're cutting back to that scene now. Hushai just got in town, and Absalom's walking into Jerusalem, right? He just got in. It says, now Absalom and all the people, the men of Israel, came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel with him. So Absalom finally seizes the capital. Remember, he was in Hebron when he did this. Ironically, following the pattern of David. He starts in Hebron, gains his power there, and then goes to Jerusalem. So now he's in Jerusalem, and it says here, the men of Israel. So that suggests he's got a broad support base now. His approval rating's going up, right? He's going up. He's getting more. He rolls in with his crew, and immediately people are like, oh, okay, Absalom's the king now. I'm with him, right? So he's got the men of Israel and Ahithophel, which also helped. Not only does he have a bunch of men from Israel, he has the wisest counselor, right? Who does David have now? David doesn't have Ahithophel. So David's wisest counselor is now on Absalom's side. So it does seem to the average man who's looking and doesn't have a spiritual heart and to see that this is evil and wrong, says, well, Absalom's going to be the king now. He's got Ahithophel. God's given him the kingdom. We're following Absalom now. So it shows that Absalom is gaining power. And it shows also that Ahithophel's defection, the fact that he defected from David, was such a political betrayal that actually, it was at the highest level, that actually probably helped convince, like I said, others to go along with it. And it says here in verse 16, and when Hushai the Archite, David's friend, came to Absalom, he said, long live the king, long live the king. So remember, Hushai was also one of David's closest advisors, and this time he's going to act as a double agent. He's a double agent. He's part of the communication network, right? He's supposed to throw off Ahithophel's counsel because Ahithophel is wise with God's counsel, and he doesn't want Absalom to have this wisdom. So that's the whole reason Hushai's there. And this is going to mark the beginning of God's providence against Absalom's rebellion. Here's where God starts to come in and start to turn things against Absalom. I love what he says there. Long live the king. Long live the king. This is a calculated phrase. I think Hushai means it. But who's the king? David. Absalom's not actually king. David's the king. Israel says he's the king, but David's the king. So Hushai, you could just see in his head, like, as he talks, we'll start to break it down. He's probably always talking about David, so he's not lying. Because he doesn't want to lie, but he's saying, long live the king, and he has to convince him. But, Absalom's going to take it full of pride, his ego, like, oh, he's long live the king, that's me. But really, I think it could actually refer to David. It's one of those things that could be double. It could refer to Absalom or David. And I think Hushai is intentionally being deceitful, but in a way to protect David and to help him here. So Absalom, he's questioning Hushai because he knows Hushai, like Ahithophel, was one of David's friends. And Ahithophel at least made a little bit of sense because remember, Ahithophel's was related to Bathsheba. That was his granddaughter. And he's a little fired up about what happened to Bathsheba. So he is a little bitter about what David's done. So he could see why Ahithophel joined him, but why would Hushai? Hushai's great friends with David, right? Says, is this your loyalty to your friend? Why'd you not go with your friend? So Absalom's a little suspicious at first. A little bit of wisdom here. As he knows, it was one of David's closest advisors. So, but his question is, how ironic is this? Like, who are you betraying here? And a lot of times it's funny because people like Absalom, who is a betrayer, he's betrayed his father, right? They often expect loyalty from others. Isn't that ironic? The ones who betray people, they want loyalty now. It's like, you're not even loyal, dude. Like, what's your problem, right? So Absalom now all of a sudden wants loyalty. We're not having defection. We're not having people betray people. I need full loyalty. So part of his own DNA is he's a betrayer. But we're going to see whatever Galatians says, whatever one sows, that will he also reap. And that's what we're going to see here. And God's sovereign plan, like I said, is at work, even as betrayal here. We're going to move on down here now to verse 18 and 19. And Hushai said to Absalom, no, for whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, his I will be, and with him I will remain. And again, who should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. So another thing here, he mentions the Lord's will here. He says, what does he say? For whom the Lord and this people and all the men of Israel have chosen, I will be with him and I will remain. Who did the Lord make king? Absalom? No. The Lord chose David. So whoever the Lord chose, I will remain. So again, Hushai's not technically lying here. He's undercover saying, I'm still with David. He's not lying, being manipulative, maybe lying by omission, you would say today, right? But this is all part of the Lord's plan. He says it there. And again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. You could also maybe say, just like I served your father, I'm going to serve you in the way I would serve David. So you can see these double entendres. You can see these double moves here. Absalom's going to take it again with his ego that, all right, he's turning to me. But Hushai deep down is a double meaning saying, I'm going to serve you as if I'm serving your father, right? I'm going to do it for David. I'm here for David. But he's not actually saying it. It's not for personal gain. Hushai's not deceiving for personal gain. He's doing it to protect David and to bring him back his kingdom and really to throw off Ahithophel's counsel, right? It says, and again, whom should I serve? Should it not be his son? As I have served your father, so I will serve you. And then we go down here to verse 20 through 23, finishes out the chapter here. Then Absalom said to Ahithophel, "Give your counsel. What shall we do?" So remember, Ahithophel, wisest counselor that David has. Ahithophel wants David's trusted advisor to chime in here. And he recognizes Ahithophel's wise and he has some tough decisions to make. So he asks him what to do, right? And Ahithophel, look what he says. "Go into your father's concubines, whom he has left to keep the house." Remember from the last chapter when David was leaving and he sent back the Ark of the Covenant. Remember he left 10 concubines back to take care of the palace so the palace didn't get destroyed? It was all divine design, unfortunately. That's who he's referring to, those 10 concubines who are taking care of that kingdom that David let them to remain to take care of things. This is who he's going after. And he says, "Go into your father's concubines whom he has left to keep the house." This is going to be an irreversible rebellion. So Ahithophel knows once Absalom does it, it's permanent. There's no reconciling. Why? Because taking a king's concubine was taking the throne, remember? That's why, that's why David had to get Michal from Saul. He had to get her back to show that he was taking Saul's house and his house and bringing it back. That's why those things happened. So when you slept with the king's concubines, you were taking his throne. And he knew that's what it was going to do. And it's sad because, Ahithophel was bitter and he wanted David to suffer, right, for what happened to Bathsheba. I could see that's where it came into, right? But the sad thing is they didn't think about these 10 women. Think about these 10 women, or they're doing their job. Now they have to be used and abused for political stuff. Still happens today in other ways, sadly. This is an awful way to go about this. But remember, flip back here. We have a little time because you're not too far. 2 Samuel 12. Go back to 2 Samuel 12 for a second. Hold your finger in 16. 2 Samuel 12 and go to verse 11 and 12. 2 Samuel 12, verses 11 and 12 here. It says, "Thus says the Lord." Remember Nathan saying this to David. "Behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house." That'd be Absalom. "And I'll take your wives, concubines too, before your eyes and give them to your neighbor. Well, you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel." This is the prophecy being fulfilled. Remember, God had Nathan say this back then in chapter 12. So God's not mocked. For what somebody sows, they will also reap. David's sin was private, but now the consequences will be public, right? And it says in verse 22 in chapter 16 here, "So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof." Where did David see Bathsheba from? The roof, right? The roof. And it was up top where you can see high. And I'm sure, do you ever look at a rooftop for, down here, and if you saw somebody standing on a roof, you could look up in a city and look, you can see in, one of these towns, you'd be able to see somebody up on the roof. That's what's going on. Anybody's going to be able to see this. He's going to do it publicly, probably on the very rooftop where David did this to Bathsheba. So it's the same place, and it's happening to David, and David's going to be humiliated in front of all Israel. And unfortunately, they'll always remember that. Even when David comes back, they'll always remember David's concubines being humiliated like that up there on the roof. And it says, verse 23, "Now in those days, the counsel that Ahithophel gave was as if one consulted the word of God." Ahithophel is known for his unmatched wisdom here. And you can even see this here. It sounds evil, but this word from Ahithophel, as evil as it sounds, Ahithophel's probably thinking from a sinful, saying, like, he doesn't care about the women, but at the same time, God's giving these words to fulfill this prophecy, right? Not that it was good, but God already told Nathan it was going to happen, so God's telling Ahithophel, so it's saying just because Ahithophel did this evil thing doesn't mean that God wasn't giving him the words to say, to do, because he was actually having him carry it out. And Ahithophel was wise, and he was one of the wisest ones there, which again is why Hushai needed to come to confuse him, because whatever Ahithophel said was probably going to work if God was truly with him, right? And that's how this chapter 16, ends. What a mess, right? Anybody have any questions or comments based on chapter 16 or anything we read there, or anything else that has to do with it? All right. Well, thanks again, everybody. Be sure to read ahead. We'll be in chapter 17, Lord willing, next week. Keep on studying. Keep reading your Bibles. Keep your lamps trimmed and burning, and I'll see you next time.